And Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine has announced that she intends to vote yes on Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson's nomination to the Supreme Court. This announcement means Jackson will be confirmed to the court with bipartisan support. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia has also announced that he will support the nomination, all but guaranteeing Jackson's confirmation. The Senate is evenly split with 50 Democratic caucus members and 50 Republican members. Jackson needs a simple majority of 51 of the 100 senators to be confirmed.
Spent a great deal of time reviewing Judge Jackson's record, interviewing her twice, once before the hearing, once after the hearing, for a total of 2.5 hours. And I talked to other legal experts and reviewed numerous documents. In the end, I decided that she had the qualifications, the experience, and the credentials that we require of a Supreme Court justice and warranted my support. We had an in-depth discussion of many of the cases that were brought up at the hearings, and she explained in more detail her careful, thoughtful reasoning. I didn't always agree with the results that she came up with, but I had no doubt that she applies a very careful approach to the facts of a case when she is judging.
Well, for more on these stories, Arise U.S. correspondent Eric Ham joins me live from Washington, D.C. Eric, thank you for joining me. Now, Biden and Zelensky in another phone conversation just 24 hours after what looks like a failed promise by Putin. What have both leaders been discussing?
President Zelensky on the conversation with those European leaders. He also walked him through the sanctions that were announced last week on Russia, how those sanctions would play out, who they would specifically target. In addition to that, we know that President Zelensky spoke to President Biden about the negotiations that took place yesterday. Those negotiations that were now seen as hopeful and optimistic for many Ukrainian leaders. We also know that during this conversation, President Biden announced that that the United States would provide an additional $500 million in support to Ukraine. We're now learning that $500 million will go specifically towards stimulating the Ukrainian economy, as well as providing that money for allow the government to continue to run. So paying salaries and keeping people on payrolls, things like that. We do not know specifically where the money is coming from. Is it coming specifically out of that $13.6 billion that Congress passed for additional aid and support to Ukraine, or if it's coming from another pot of money, such as the U.S. Agency for International Development? Those are questions that right now the White House they're not prepared to answer that question. But that was the crux of the conversation. Also, of course, we know President Biden continued to showcase support from the United States for Ukraine as this war continues to play out.
Very well. Eric, you just referenced the fact that Biden in the last 24 hours has been meeting with European leaders, the Prime Minister of Singapore, all directed at the war in Ukraine. Do we know what might happen next?
Not a clue, but in fact, we just heard from the Pentagon spokesperson, John Kirby, who says that the reason that they believe that this is not a de-escalation, and they are not calling what we're seeing a de-escalation, they are calling this a repositioning, because they are announced today from the Pentagon that the troops that are in the area of Kyiv are actually repositioning to the area of Belarus and other places. What Admiral Kirby was saying today is that if, in fact, this was a de-escalation, those troops would actually be returning to their home garrison, but they are not. And so that is evidence, at least to the Pentagon, that this suggests that this is simply the troops that are simply attempting to now try to reset and reposition themselves. And he says the focus now is on the Donetsk region of Ukraine, and that is where these Russian forces are going to focus their attention and their efforts going forward.
And of course, here we are back again to the issue with Iran, fresh sanctions on Iran. How does this really complicate the prospects of returning to the nuclear deal? That's the 2015 nuclear deal that Donald Trump exited in 2018.
Yeah, this is actually becoming more and more difficult for the White House to be able to thread this needle. We know that just recently we were told that they were close to an agreement, but it was Russia that got in the way of rejecting the agreement. And so that caused a delay. And now today we learned that the White House, through the Treasury Department, has issued additional sanctions on individuals tied to Iran's ballistic missile program. Now, the missile program is something that was a major concern for the White House during the Trump years as well. In fact, that was one of the reasons we saw and heard for President Trump actually pulling out of the nuclear agreement. And so now today we're seeing that the White House becoming more aggressive, sanctioning individuals who are tied directly to this program. Will it cause further delays in an agreement on the nuclear program? It's unclear at this time. However, what we have heard constantly from the Iranians is that they have wanted to see these sanctions removed. So perhaps this gives them greater incentive to actually strike a deal, because we know that they have been seeking to get from under these crippling sanctions for years now.
Recent developments we are seeing coming out of the Capitol now, despite the fierce attacks on Supreme Court nominee, that's Ketanji Brown Jackson, by the Republicans. It looks like we will be having a bipartisan vote after all. How significant is this?
Yeah, that's very important. In fact, that is something that President Biden was hoping he'd be able to get. Remember, this is a Supreme Court nominee who has already been through 3 confirmations where she has received bipartisan support. And so now what we are seeing today with Republican Senator Susan Collins saying that she will support this nominee, the president does get a nominee that will get to the courts on a bipartisan basis. But also the fact that we now know that Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has come out and said that he will support this nominee gives President Biden the 50 votes that he needs to pass this nomination. And with the vice president who serves as the president of the Senate, that means that she will likely get through. We are told that the vote in committee is going to take place on April 4th. The Judiciary Committee will meet to actually move this nomination to the full Senate floor for confirmation, where we're told it's expected to pass between April 8th and April 16th.
All right, Eric, just before we wrap up this conversation, and very quickly too, do you think that she might get more Republican votes?
Well, if I were a betting man, I'd say she'd probably gather at least 1 to 2 more additional Republican votes, but don't hold me to that.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much, Eric, and thanks for all the updates.